ChatGPT said. The tent trembled with every distant thud, but the old general barely flinched. His hands clasped behind his back, rested with the casual certainty of a man who believed himself untouchable. Around him, the war room buzzed with maps, radio chatter, and the restless movements of young soldiers. Then, without warning, the heavy fabric at the rear of the tent lifted, and a figure stepped inside. A woman in weather-worn fatigues, carrying a long rifle that looked more suited to a museum than a battlefield. He smirked the moment he saw it. His voice, dripping with mockery, carried across the tent. The so-called relic had no place here, not in the age of guided drones and digital targeting systems. Several soldiers exchanged glances, their lips twitching with stifled amusement. She didn't answer, not a single word. She simply stood there, rifle resting against her shoulder, her eyes calm but locked on the general, as if she were measuring him against a memory he could never see. The quiet was more cutting than any retort, and though he didn't show it, a sliver of unease slid under his skin. Her face told a story few here knew. Years in sun-baked deserts, where the air burned the throat and the ground shimmered with heat that never seemed to fade. Nights lit only by tracer fire, friends who had stood beside her and then didn't. A boy from her unit, who once told her the rifle was lucky, the kind of lucky that pulled people back from the edge when the odds were impossible. She had kept it after that day. The barrel was scratched, the scope weathered, but it still whispered with the weight of 1,000 quiet victories. The general's disdain wasn't new. She had faced it before, in the voices of bureaucrats, in the eyes of officers who measured worth only in polished steel and digital readouts. She had been told she was obsolete, irrelevant, too bound to the past to fit the clean geometry of the new war. And yet, it was her rifle that had kept her alive in places the drones couldn't see, where the satellites lost track, and where the maps were nothing more than lies printed on paper. Outside, the fight was turning. The enemy had shifted their artillery, threading shells closer and closer to the command post. Maps flapped violently on the walls, loose papers scattering across the floor like startled birds. She moved toward the front of the tent without invitation, stopping before the massive display screen where live feeds from the field painted a chaotic mosaic. Her eyes narrowed on a ridge far in the distance, nearly invisible through the haze. There was something there. The barely perceptible flicker of glass in sunlight, the kind only a trained sniper would notice. The general caught her watching and barked a laugh. He told her the new systems had already scanned that sector, that nothing was there. She neither nodded nor disagreed. Instead, she reached into a pouch, unhurried, and began adjusting the weathered rifle, with the deliberate patience of someone tuning a trusted instrument. A young private nearby, no older than 20, froze as he watched her movements, the way her fingers moved without hesitation, as though the rifle were an extension of herself. A ripple of tension moved through the tent. The general made a show of rolling his eyes, but the soldiers could feel it, the subtle shift in air when someone knows something you don't. She stepped closer to the flap, leaned her rifle on the support pole, and sighted down the scope. Her breath slowed, time stretched. And then, a squeeze of the trigger. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The general smirked again, ready to declare her shot a waste of precious ammunition. But then came the bloom. Far off on the ridge, a flash followed by a shockwave that rolled over the field like a living thing. The feed on the main screen jolted to life, showing a plume of smoke rising from what had been a hidden artillery position. The soldiers nearest the tent, entrants instinctively turned toward the light pouring in from outside. And then the blast wave arrived. It struck the tent with the force of a giant's breath, scattering maps, knocking cups from tables, and sending loose pages swirling in a frantic dance. The general's mockery froze on his lips as reality crashed over him. He looked back at the woman, her expression unchanged, the faint curl of vapor from the rifle's barrel twisting upward. Silence took the tent. No one laughed now. The young private stared at her as though seeing her for the first time. She met his gaze briefly, her eyes carrying something heavier than pride. A quiet reminder that skill was not born from the shine of a weapon, but from the unyielding hours, the scars no one counted, and the friends who would never come home. The general tried to recover, to summon the authority that moments before had filled the air. But his words died as quickly as they came. He knew, though he would never admit it aloud, that without her, they would now be counting bodies instead of victories. His rank, his ribbons, his perfectly pressed uniform meant nothing in the face of that truth. One of the older sergeants in the corner, a man who had been watching silently, finally spoke. His voice was low but carried through the room like a verdict, the kind of statement that wasn't meant to be challenged. The woman gave no reaction. She didn't need to. Her work was done. Outside, the battle raged on, but in the tent, a new kind of order had settled, one not written in manuals or declared by rank. It was the unspoken recognition of someone who had walked into the storm, stood their ground, and left the doubters speechless. Later, long after the smoke on the ridge had thinned and the chaos of the day had faded into night, the soldiers still spoke about it in hushed tones. Not about the rifle, nor the impossible shot, but about the moment the general's voice faltered. The moment silence won. Respect once lost is rarely given back. But in that tent, amid the scattered maps and the lingering scent of burnt air, every man and woman present understood something unshakable. The battlefield doesn't care about your titles. It only listens to those who speak with actions carved from resolve. And she, the woman with the so-called museum piece, had just told the loudest story without saying a word.